The crack of a gunshot split the air as Quinn Calloway dropped to one knee behind the water trough, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was supposed to be a peaceful morning on the Double C Ranch, but peace was hard to come by in Wyoming Territory in 1876. The commotion had started when he'd spotted a figure darting between the trees at the edge of his property, a figure that moved like no man he'd ever seen. Quinn peered over the edge of the trough, squinting into the distance where the aspen grove met his grazing land. Something was still moving there, something quick and low to the ground. He'd heard stories from the other ranchers about cattle thieves, about Sioux warriors displaced by the ongoing conflicts, about desperate men driven to violence by the hardships of frontier life. But what emerged from those trees wasn't what he expected at all. It was a woman. At least, he thought it was a woman. Her hair hung in wild, matted tangles around a face streaked with dirt. She wore what might have once been a dress, now reduced to tattered rags, with what looked like animal hides wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide and alert, darting around like a cornered animal's. Quinn stood slowly, keeping his rifle pointed at the ground. The woman froze, staring at him with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "I'm not going to hurt you," he called out, his voice carrying across the open space between them. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she crouched lower, as if preparing to bolt back into the trees. "Are you hungry?" Quinn tried again. "I've got food in the house." At the mention of food, the woman's posture changed slightly. She remained wary but took one small step forward, then another. Quinn stood perfectly still, afraid that any sudden movement would send her running. As she drew closer, he could see that beneath the dirt and tangled hair, she was young, maybe in her 20s. Her skin was badly sunburned in some places and deathly pale in others. Her arms and legs were scratched and scarred. "My name's Quinn," he said, speaking slowly and clearly. "Quinn Calloway. This is my ranch." The woman stopped about 20 feet away from him. Her eyes, a startling clear blue, assessed him with an animal wariness. "Do you understand me?" Quinn asked. "Do you speak English?" After a long pause, the woman gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried again, and this time Quinn heard a raspy whisper. "MMM." She struggled, as if she hadn't spoken in a very long time. "And Mary." "Mary," Quinn repeated. "That's a nice name. Would you like some water, Mary? And maybe something to eat?" Another nod, more definite this time. Quinn slowly gestured toward the house. "It's just over there. You can come with me if you want." Mary looked toward the modest cabin, then back at Quinn, then at the trees behind her. For a moment, he thought she would run, but hunger must have won out over fear. She took another step toward him. That was how it began. Quinn Calloway, 32 years old, hardened by years of ranch work and solitude, extending an uncertain hand of friendship to a woman who seemed more wild creature than human. He couldn't have known that this moment would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone in Sweetwater Valley. Quinn led Mary to his cabin, moving slowly so as not to startle her. The interior was simple but clean, a testament to the orderly life Quinn had built for himself since settling here 5 years ago. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat in the center, and a curtained-off area in the back contained his bed. "Sit," he said, pulling out one of the chairs. "Please." Mary remained standing, her eyes darting around the cabin as if searching for escape routes. "It's all right," Quinn assured her. "You're safe here." Eventually, she perched on the edge of the chair, her body tense and ready to flee. Quinn moved to the small kitchen area and poured water from a pitcher into a cup. When he approached her with it, Mary snatched it from his hands and drank greedily, water spilling down her chin and onto her tattered clothes. Quinn busied himself with preparing food, some leftover venison stew that he reheated over the fire. He kept his movements deliberate and calm, stealing glances at his strange visitor. Who was she? How had she ended up wandering his land in such a state? She didn't look native, but she moved with the wariness of someone accustomed to living off the land. When he placed the bowl of stew in front of her, Mary stared at it for a long moment before picking it up with both hands and bringing it to her mouth. She ate like someone who hadn't seen a proper meal in months, perhaps years. "There's more if you want it," Quinn said when she finished. Mary looked up at him, and for a brief moment, something like gratitude flickered across her face. Thank you, she managed, her voice still a rough whisper. You're welcome to clean up too, Quinn said, gesturing to a wash basin in the corner. I can find you some clothes. They'll be too big, but they'll be clean. Mary didn't respond to this offer immediately. Instead, she asked why. Why what? Why help me? Quinn considered the question. Because you need it, he said simply. And I've been in places where I needed help too. The next morning, Quinn woke to find Mary curled up on the floor near the fireplace, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her. She'd refused the bed he'd offered, even though he'd said he would sleep in the barn. Trust would take time, he supposed. She had accepted the clothes, an old shirt and a pair of trousers with suspenders pulled tight, and had washed her face and arms, though her hair remained a tangled mess. Even so, the transformation was remarkable. Beneath the dirt and fear, Mary was a striking woman with high cheekbones and those piercing blue eyes. Morning, Quinn said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Mary sat up immediately, fully alert. I'm going to make breakfast, he continued. Then I've got chores to do. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. Why? She asked again, that same question from the night before. Quinn shrugged. Like I said, you need help. And I've got room. Mary watched him as he prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee. She ate silently, her eyes never leaving him for long. I need to ride into town today, Quinn said as he cleaned up their dishes. For supplies. You can come along if you want, or stay here. It's up to you. People, Mary said, shaking her head. Not fond of people? Quinn asked. Can't say I blame you much. Town's full of gossips and not much else. But you'd be safe with me. Mary shook her head again, more firmly this time. All right then. I won't be gone long. There's more food if you get hungry, and I will. Work? Mary interrupted, her voice a bit stronger than it had been the previous day. For staying here. Quinn regarded her with surprise. You don't have to work, Mary. You need to rest and get your strength back. No. Her eyes flashed with determination. Work. Quinn recognized the pride in her stance. He understood it well enough. All right, he conceded. If you feel up to it, the vegetable garden could use some tending. Just pulling weeds would be helpful. But don't push yourself. Mary nodded, seemingly satisfied with this arrangement. Quinn's trip to town took longer than expected. Sweetwater was little more than a dusty main street with a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other buildings, but it served as the social hub for the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area. As soon as Quinn tied his horse outside the general store, he was accosted by Orville Jenkins, whose spread bordered the double sea to the south. Quinn Calloway. Heard you got yourself some company out at your place, Jenkins said, his voice carrying enough that several heads turned in their direction. Quinn frowned. News traveled impossibly fast in this country, even when there was nothing but miles of open range between neighbors. Just helping someone who's down on their luck, he replied neutrally. That ain't what I heard, Jenkins persisted. Heard it was some wild woman you found roaming your property. Half naked and crazy as a loon, they're saying. Quinn felt a surge of anger. You shouldn't believe everything you hear, Orville. My boy Toby was riding fence yesterday and saw you leading her into your cabin. Said she looked like she'd been raised by wolves or some such. By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the prospect of fresh gossip. I found a woman who needed help, Quinn said firmly. That's all there is to it. You always did have a soft spot for strays, said Hank Wallace, the owner of the general store. Remember that three-legged coyote pup you tried to raise? This is different, Quinn muttered. Is it? Jenkins laughed. You thinking of domesticating her, Calloway? Making her a proper ranch wife. The men around them chuckled, and Quinn felt his face grow hot with anger and embarrassment. She's just staying until she gets back on her feet, he said. And I'd appreciate it if you'd all mind your own business. Well, you be careful, Jenkins said, his tone mock serious. Wild things have a way of turning on you when you least expect it. Quinn finished his shopping as quickly as possible, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed him. As he loaded his supplies onto his horse, he was approached by the town's preacher, Reverend Miller. Mr. Calloway, the Reverend said, his expression grave. I wonder if I might have a word. Quinn sighed. If it's about my guest, Reverend, I've heard enough already. I'm merely concerned for the propriety of the situation, Reverend Miller said. A single man taking in an unmarried woman, it raises questions of moral character. With all due respect, Reverend, I found someone who needed help, and I helped them. Isn't that what your sermons are always about? The Reverend's lips thinned. Christian charity is indeed a virtue, Mr. Calloway. But so is avoiding the appearance of impropriety. Perhaps this woman would be better served staying with Mrs. Whitaker. She often takes in those in need. I'll mention it to her, Quinn said, though he had no intention of doing so. Mrs. Whitaker was the town busybody, and Mary would be subjected to endless questions and judgment. But it's her choice where she stays. See that you do, the Reverend said, and perhaps you might bring her to Sunday services. The Lord's word can be a powerful healing force for the troubled soul. Quinn nodded noncommittally and mounted his horse, eager to leave the town and its judgments behind. When he returned to the ranch, he found Mary in the garden as she'd promised. She'd done more than pull a few weeds. The entire garden had been meticulously tended, and she was now harvesting ripe tomatoes and placing them carefully in a basket. You've been busy, Quinn said, dismounting. Mary looked up, pushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her hand. She'd managed to untangle some of the worst knots, and her hair now hung in loose waves around her shoulders. It helps, she said simply. Helps what? To work. To be useful. Quinn nodded, understanding perfectly. Well, I appreciate it. Those tomatoes look perfect. A ghost of a smile crossed Mary's face, there and gone so quickly that Quinn almost missed it. I'll help you unload, she said, setting down the basket and walking toward him. Town was talking about you, Quinn said as they carried supplies into the cabin. News travels fast around here. Mary stiffened. What did they say? Nothing worth repeating, Quinn assured her. People like to talk, especially when they don't have the facts. They think I am. Strange, Mary said, not a question but a statement. They don't know you, Quinn replied, and folks tend to fear what they don't understand. Mary nodded, a knowing look in her eyes that made Quinn wonder again about her past. Who was she before he found her on his land? What had happened to reduce her to such a state? But he didn't ask. Questions could come later, when she was ready. That evening, as they sat eating a supper of fried tomatoes and salt pork, Mary spoke more than she had since arriving. I was in a wagon train, she said suddenly, setting down her fork. 2 years ago, heading to Oregon. Quinn looked up, surprised by the voluntary information. There was an attack, she continued, her voice flat, as if she were reciting facts about strangers rather than her own life. Bandits, not Indians like everyone assumed. They killed the men, took the women. She swallowed hard. I escaped, ran into the wilderness. You've been out there for 2 years? Quinn asked, trying to keep the shock from his voice. Mary nodded. I learned how to survive, how to stay hidden. Her eyes met his. How to be invisible to men who would hurt me. I'm sorry that happened to you, Quinn said softly. I'm not telling you for pity, Mary said, a flash of steel in her voice. I'm telling you so you know who you've taken in. I appreciate that, Quinn replied, but it doesn't change anything. You're welcome here for as long as you want to stay. Mary studied him, as if searching for some hidden motive. The town. They will not like it. Quinn shrugged. The town doesn't have much say in what happens on the Double C. Another ghost of a smile, this one lasting a heartbeat longer than the first. Double C. Calloway Creek Ranch, Quinn explained, though the creek's barely more than a trickle most years. It's a good place, Mary said, looking around the modest cabin. Peaceful. Most days, Quinn agreed, though we have our share of troubles. Wolves after the calves. Drought. The occasional dispute with neighbors over grazing rights. But it's yours, Mary said. You built it. Quinn nodded. Started with nothing but a land claim and 2 horses. Built the cabin myself. Added a little more each year. It shows, Mary said. The care you take. Something warm unfurled in Quinn's chest at her words, simple appreciation from someone who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Mary grew stronger, filling out the borrowed clothes as proper nutrition restored her health. She worked alongside Quinn, proving herself knowledgeable about plants and surprisingly skilled with animals. The ranch horses, normally skittish around strangers, took to her immediately. Quinn found himself enjoying her company, appreciating her quiet competence and the rare moments when she would share observations about the land or the weather. She spoke little of her past beyond that initial revelation, and he didn't press her. A week turned into 2, and Quinn realized that he'd grown accustomed to having Mary around. The cabin felt more like a home with her in it. She'd arranged wildflowers in a jar on the table, repaired a chair that had been wobbly for months, and somehow made the simple meals they shared feel like occasions rather than mere necessity. But the peace couldn't last. Sweetwater Valley was too small a community for Mary's presence to go unremarked upon for long. The trouble started on a Saturday afternoon when Quinn and Mary were repairing a section of fence that had been damaged during a recent thunderstorm. They'd been working companionably side by side when the sound of approaching horses made them both look up. Orville Jenkins and his son Toby were riding toward them, along with 2 other men from town, Sam Tucker, who owned the saloon, and Dale Wilson, who raised sheep on the north side of the valley. "Calloway," Jenkins called out as they approached. "Thought we'd pay a neighborly visit." Quinn straightened, instinctively positioning himself slightly in front of Mary. "Afternoon, gentlemen. What brings you out this way?" "Like I said, being neighborly," Jenkins replied, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Wanted to meet this guest of yours properly." The 4 men reined in their horses a few yards away, looking down at Quinn and Mary with undisguised curiosity. "This is Mary," Quinn said simply. "Mary, these are some of the men from town. Orville Jenkins and his son Toby, Sam Tucker, and Dale Wilson." Mary nodded but said nothing, her posture tense and watchful. "Cat got your tongue, girl?" Tucker asked, grinning. "She doesn't talk much," Quinn said. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got work to finish before sundown." "Work, is it?" Jenkins said, his tone insinuating. "That what you call it? You've had this woman living with you for weeks now, Calloway. People are starting to talk." "People are always talking," Quinn replied evenly. "Doesn't make it any of their business. It becomes our business when it reflects on the moral character of our community," Wilson said. He was a deacon at the church and took his position seriously. "Reverend Miller is quite concerned. There's nothing immoral happening here," Quinn said, feeling his temper rise. "Mary needed help, and I provided it. That's all." "Is it?" Jenkins pressed. "Then why not bring her to town? Why keep her out here, hidden away?" "I'm not hidden," Mary spoke suddenly, her voice stronger than Quinn had ever heard it. "I choose to be here." The men looked startled to hear her speak. "Well, she does talk," Tucker laughed. "And with quite a proper accent, too. Not the wild woman we were led to believe." "I never said she was wild," Quinn growled. "That's town gossip at work." "Regardless," Wilson said, "the situation is inappropriate. A single woman living with an unmarried man. I have my own room." Mary interrupted again. "And Mr. Calloway has been nothing but a gentleman." "Mr. Calloway, is it?" Jenkins sneered. "Very formal for 2 people sharing a cabin." Quinn took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. "You're on my land, Jenkins. I suggest you watch your tone." Tension crackled in the air, and for a moment, Quinn thought it might come to blows. Then Toby Jenkins, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "Pa, we should go. We've said our piece." Orville Jenkins looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment, he nodded. "We'll be on our way. But this isn't the end of it, Calloway. Town's talking about forming a committee. Moral decency and all that. They can form whatever committees they want," Quinn said. "What happens on my ranch is my business." The men turned their horses and rode away, but Quinn knew this was just the beginning. The town had gotten it into their collective mind that something improper was happening at the Double C, and they wouldn't let it go easily. "I should leave," Mary said once the riders were out of earshot. "I'm causing trouble for you." "You're not going anywhere unless you want to," Quinn said firmly. "Those men don't dictate what happens here." Mary looked at him, her blue eyes troubled. "They will make things difficult. Let them try," Quinn replied, though he knew she was right. In a community as small as Sweetwater Valley, social pressure could be a powerful force. But the thought of Mary leaving, of returning to the solitary existence he'd had before she arrived, was suddenly unbearable. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Quinn broached a subject he'd been considering for several days. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about making your position here more official." Mary looked up from the sock she was darning. "Official? I could use help running this place," Quinn continued. It's too much for one person, and you've proven yourself more than capable. I'd pay you a fair wage, and you could stay in the cabin. Or I could build you a separate one, if you'd prefer. Mary set her mending aside. You want me to work for you? As an employee? Quinn nodded. It would give you a proper standing in the community. Make it harder for them to gossip. They would still gossip, Mary said with a slight smile. But I appreciate the offer. Is that a yes? Quinn asked. Mary was quiet for a long moment, considering. Yes, she finally said. But I have conditions. Name them. I won't go to town unless necessary. I won't attend church socials or quilting bees or whatever it is women do here. Her eyes met his, steady and determined. And I keep my past to myself. No one needs to know where I came from or what happened to me. Agreed, Quinn said without hesitation. Though people will ask questions. Let them ask, Mary said with a shrug. I don't have to answer. With that settled, a new phase of their relationship began. Mary moved from guest to employee, though in practice little changed. They continued to share meals and work side by side. But now there was a formality to their arrangement that Quinn found both reassuring and oddly disappointing. The disappointment puzzled him until, lying awake one night, he admitted to himself that he'd grown to care for Mary as more than just a hired hand or a friend. There was something about her quiet strength, her resilience, and the rare moments when she would let down her guard and laugh that had worked its way into his heart. But he would never act on these feelings. Mary had been through too much, had only just begun to rebuild her life. The last thing she needed was for him to complicate things with unwanted attentions. So Quinn kept his growing affection to himself, focusing instead on the work of the ranch and the careful dance of avoiding town as much as possible. When he did have to go in for supplies, he went alone, enduring the sidelong glances and whispered comments with gritted teeth. The tensions might have continued indefinitely if not for what happened in early September, just as the first hints of autumn were touching the aspen leaves with gold. Quinn had ridden out at dawn to check on a section of the herd grazing in the north pasture. Mary had stayed behind to tend to the chickens and milk the cow, a division of labor they'd settled into naturally. He was just turning back toward the ranch when he saw the smoke, a thick, dark column rising into the clear morning sky. It was coming from the direction of the ranch house. Quinn dug his heels into his horse's flanks, urging the animal to a gallop. As he crested the last rise before the ranch proper, his heart nearly stopped. The barn was ablaze, flames licking up the wooden walls and thick smoke billowing from the hayloft. And there, in front of the inferno, was Mary, facing off against 3 mounted men. Even from a distance, Quinn recognized Orville Jenkins and his son. The third man he didn't know. Mary was holding Quinn's Winchester rifle, and she had it trained on the men. Her stance was wide and steady, the rifle held with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. Quinn urged his horse faster, closing the distance rapidly. As he drew nearer, he could hear Jenkins' voice, raised in anger. Teach you and Calloway a lesson about proper behavior. No one wants your kind here. Get off this land, Mary replied, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. Now. Or what? Toby Jenkins sneered. You going to shoot us, you wild bitch? In answer, Mary raised the rifle and fired. The shot kicked up dirt at the hooves of Jenkins' horse, causing the animal to rear in panic. The next one won't miss, Mary warned, already levering another round into the chamber. That was when Quinn arrived, pulling his horse to a sliding stop and drawing his own pistol in one fluid motion. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, though the scene told its own story. Your wild woman pulled a gun on us, Jenkins shouted, struggling to control his frightened horse. We were just passing by, and she came out shooting. Liar, Mary said calmly, the rifle still trained on the men. They set the barn on fire, said they were going to burn out the immoral elements. Quinn's blood ran cold. He'd expected gossip, social pressure, maybe even a visit from the town committee. But arson? That crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Is that true, Jenkins? Quinn asked, his voice dangerously quiet. She can't prove anything, Jenkins blustered, but his eyes shifted away, unable to meet Quinn's gaze. I saw them do it, Mary insisted. They didn't know I was in the garden. I got the rifle and came out as they were watching it burn. The third man, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. This has gone too far, Orville. I didn't sign up for burning a man's property. "Shut up, Patterson," Jenkins snapped. But the damage was done. The admission hung in the air, as damning as a signed confession. "Get off my land," Quinn said, his voice low and controlled despite the rage burning in his chest. "And if I see any of you set foot on the Double C again, I won't be as forgiving as Mary was. I won't aim for the dirt." For a moment, it seemed Jenkins might argue, but self-preservation won out. He wheeled his horse around, followed by his son and the reluctant Patterson. "This isn't over, Calloway," he called back as they rode away. "The town won't stand for your immoral arrangements." Quinn ignored the threat, turning instead to Mary. "Are you all right?" She nodded, lowering the rifle now that the immediate danger had passed. "I'm fine. But the barn." They both turned to look at the burning structure. The fire had consumed most of it by now, the roof already collapsed and the walls beginning to cave in. "Did you get the animals out?" Quinn asked, dreading the answer. "Yes," Mary said, "as soon as I smelled smoke. The horses are in the corral, and I managed to get the tack out before the fire spread too far." Relief washed over Quinn. The barn could be rebuilt, the tools and tack replaced, but the horses, his livelihood and companions, would have been an irreplaceable loss. "You saved them," he said, looking at Mary with newfound admiration. "And you stood up to those men alone." "I wasn't going to let them destroy what you've built," Mary said simply. In that moment, with the fire casting golden light across her determined face, Quinn realized that the feelings he'd been trying to suppress had grown beyond his control. He loved this woman, loved her strength, her courage, her quiet dignity in the face of adversity. But now wasn't the time for such revelations. They had a fire to deal with, and after that, the very real threat that Jenkins and his ilk would return with more men and more destructive intentions. The barn couldn't be saved, but they managed to keep the fire from spreading to the cabin or the other outbuildings. By mid-afternoon, all that remained was a smoking ruin and the smell of charred wood hanging heavy in the air. "We should report this to the sheriff," Mary said as they sat on the porch, exhausted from hours of fighting the fire. Quinn shook his head. "Sheriff Blackwood is Jenkins' brother-in-law. He won't do anything." "Then what do we do?" Mary asked. "They'll be back, maybe with more men next time." Quinn had been pondering that very question. "I've got friends in the valley who don't hold with this kind of vigilante justice. I'll ride out tomorrow, talk to them. Maybe organize some protection." Mary was quiet for a moment, then said, "Or I could leave. That's what they want, isn't it? For me to go?" "No," Quinn said, more forcefully than he intended. "This is your home now. I'm not letting them drive you away." Mary looked at him, surprise, and something else, something softer in her eyes. "My home, if you want it to be," Quinn said, suddenly uncertain. "I know it's not much, and now with the barn gone, it's more than I've had in a long time," Mary interrupted. "A home, somewhere I belong." The word belong hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Did she feel it too? This connection that had grown between them? This sense that they belonged together, not just as employer and employee, but as something more? Before Quinn could find the words to ask, they heard the sound of approaching horses, a lot of them. Instantly alert, both Quinn and Mary stood, Quinn reaching for the rifle that leaned against the porch railing. "Get inside," he told Mary, but she shook her head. "We faced them together," she said, picking up the shotgun she'd placed nearby. A group of riders appeared around the bend in the road, at least a dozen men on horseback, led by Sheriff Blackwood himself. Quinn's heart sank. If the sheriff was leading them, this was an official action, or at least one with the veneer of legality. "Stay calm," Quinn murmured to Mary. "Let me do the talking." Sheriff Blackwood reined in his horse a respectful distance from the house, his eyes taking in the smoldering remains of the barn and the armed man and woman on the porch. "Calloway," he called out. "We need to talk." "About what, Sheriff?" Quinn replied, keeping his voice level despite the tension thrumming through his body. "About what happened here today," Blackwood said, "and about some allegations that have been brought to my attention." "If you mean the allegations that Orville Jenkins and his son burned down my barn, then yes, we do need to talk," Quinn said. They admitted as much before they rode off. A murmur ran through the group of riders. Not all of them were Jenkins' friends, Quinn realized. Some, like old Tom Peterson and the Hamilton brothers, were men he'd consider allies, or at least neutral parties. "That's not how Orville tells it," Blackwood said. He claims you threatened him when he came by for a neighborly visit. A neighborly visit that included setting fire to my property? Quinn scoffed. Asked Patterson. He was with them. Seemed to have an attack of conscience about the whole thing. The sheriff frowned. Jim Patterson didn't mention being here. Of course he didn't, Quinn said. But he was here, and he knows what really happened. Blackwood looked uncomfortable, glancing back at the men behind him. There's also the matter of your living arrangements, Calloway. The town council's received complaints. My living arrangements are none of the town's business, Quinn said firmly. Miss Mary is my employee, hired to help run this ranch. What she does and where she lives is between her and me. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man, Blackwood began, is perfectly acceptable when it's a working relationship, came a new voice. Reverend Miller rode forward from the back of the group. Provided, of course, that all proprieties are observed. Quinn was surprised to find the Reverend taking his side, however conditionally. All proprieties are observed, Reverend. Mary spoke up, her voice clear and steady. Mr. Calloway has been a perfect gentleman. The Reverend studied Mary, taking in her proper speech and dignified bearing, so at odds with the wild woman of town gossip. You seem a sensible young lady, he said finally. Perhaps we have all been too quick to judge. Some quicker than others, Quinn said pointedly, looking at the sheriff. And some willing to take the law into their own hands to enforce their judgments. Several of the men in the group nodded, their expressions turning grim as they looked at the burned barn. If what you're saying is true, Calloway, about Jenkins setting the fire, Blackwood said, his professional demeanor warring with family loyalty. It's true, Mary said. I saw them do it. And Mr. Patterson was with them, though he seemed reluctant. Tom Peterson, a grizzled rancher who'd been in the valley longer than anyone, spoke up. Jim Patterson's an honest man, for all his faults. If he was here, he'll tell the truth if asked directly. I intend to ask him, Blackwood said, looking uncomfortable. And I'll look into these allegations properly. See that you do, Quinn said. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you'd all kindly leave my property. We've had enough excitement for one day. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. We'll go? But this matter isn't settled, Calloway. One more thing, Quinn said as the men prepared to leave. Spread the word that the Double C is under protection. Mine and Miss Mary's, to start with. He patted the rifle meaningfully. But I expect others who believe in justice will stand with us if needed. Several of the men, including Peterson and the Hamiltons, nodded firmly at this. The message was clear. Not everyone in Sweetwater Valley agreed with Jenkins' methods or motivations. As the riders departed, Quinn and Mary remained on the porch, watching until they disappeared around the bend in the road. That went better than I expected, Quinn admitted. The Reverend surprised me, Mary said. I thought he'd be leading the charge against us. Reverend Miller's a fair man, for all his talk of propriety, Quinn said. And he doesn't hold with violence or destruction of property, no matter the cause. Do you think it's over? Mary asked, looking at the smoking ruins of the barn. Quinn shook his head. Not entirely. But I think we've gained some allies, and that'll make Jenkins think twice before trying anything else. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. Then Mary spoke, her voice soft but determined. I meant what I said about this being my home. I want to stay, Quinn, not just as your employee. Quinn turned to look at her, his heart suddenly pounding. What do you mean? Mary met his gaze steadily. I think you know. I've seen how you look at me when you think I won't notice. I've felt the way things have changed between us. Mary, Quinn began, but she placed a finger against his lips, silencing him. Let me finish. I came here broken, afraid of my own shadow. You gave me shelter, yes, but more than that you gave me respect. You never pushed, never demanded anything from me. Her voice grew softer. And somewhere along the way, I found myself looking forward to every moment with you, thinking about you when we were apart, wondering what it would be like if we were more than just whatever we are now. Quinn gently took her hand from his lips, holding it between both of his. I didn't want to pressure you, he said. After everything you've been through, the last thing you needed was me adding complications. A small smile curved Mary's lips. Life is complicated, Quinn Calloway, but some complications are worth embracing. With that, She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his a gentle, questioning kiss that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through Quinn's entire body. He responded in kind, one hand coming up to cup her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin beneath his calloused fingers. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "People will talk even more." "Let them talk," Mary said with newfound confidence. "We know the truth, and if they have a problem with it." She glanced meaningfully at the rifle leaning against the porch rail. Quinn laughed, a free and joyous sound that surprised even him. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." "See that you don't," Mary replied with a grin, and Quinn marveled at the transformation. The frightened, wild-eyed woman he'd found at the edge of his property was gone, replaced by this confident, radiant person who somehow, against all odds, cared for him as much as he cared for her. They might have stood there longer, basking in this new understanding, if not for the practical matters at hand. "We should get some rest," Quinn said reluctantly. "Tomorrow we start rebuilding the barn." Mary nodded, but didn't move away from him. "Together," she said. "Together," Quinn agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the smell of autumn in the air. Quinn and Mary had just finished breakfast and were discussing plans for the barn when they heard horses approaching once again. Exchanging concerned glances, they moved to the porch, Quinn with his rifle and Mary with the shotgun. But their defensive posture relaxed when they saw who was coming: Tom Peterson, the Hamilton brothers, and at least a dozen other men from the valley, many with wagons loaded with lumber and tools. "Morning, Calloway," Peterson called out as they approached. "Thought you might could use some help with that barn." Quinn was momentarily speechless, moved by the unexpected show of support. "We heard what happened," John Hamilton added as the men dismounted. "Jenkins went too far this time. Even his friends are saying so. The sheriff arrested him this morning," another man chimed in. "Him and his boy both." Patterson confirmed your story. "I don't know what to say," Quinn managed finally. "Thank you, all of you." "No need for thanks," Peterson said gruffly. "This is what neighbors do, even when they don't always see eye to eye on everything." His gaze flicked to Mary, acknowledging without words that while he might not fully approve of their situation, he wouldn't stand for the kind of vigilante justice Jenkins had attempted. Mary stepped forward, shotgun now held loosely at her side. "We appreciate the help," she said, her voice clear and confident. "There's coffee ready, and I can get started on some food for everyone." The men nodded, some looking surprised at her poised manner so at odds with the wild woman of town gossip. "That'd be welcome, miss," Peterson said with a touch to his hat. "It'll be a long day's work." And work they did. By sundown, the frame of the new barn was up, and plans were made for another work party the following weekend to finish the job. Throughout the day, more people arrived, not just men to help with the building, but women too, bringing food and offers of assistance to Mary. Among them was Reverend Miller's wife, Sarah, a kind-faced woman who approached Mary with none of the suspicion or judgment Mary had come to expect. "I brought a dress," Mrs. Miller said quietly, offering a wrapped package. "It might need taking in, but I thought you might like something new." Mary accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. That's very kind. Call me Sarah, please," the older woman said. "And perhaps, when you're comfortable, you might join us for Sunday services. Not everyone in town shares Orville Jenkins' narrow views." Mary hesitated, then nodded. "Perhaps I will. Someday." It was a small step, but a significant one, a tentative opening to becoming part of the community rather than standing apart from it. As the last of the visitors departed that evening, Quinn and Mary stood once again on the porch, watching the wagons and riders disappear down the road. "I didn't expect that," Mary admitted. "After everything that's happened, people can surprise you," Quinn said, slipping an arm around her waist. "Sometimes in good ways." Mary leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Do you think they'll accept us as we are?" Quinn considered the question. "Some will, some won't. But I think we've shown them that we can't be intimidated, and that's earned their respect, if nothing else." "And if they don't accept us?" Mary asked, though her tone suggested she already knew his answer. "Then we'll make our own way," Quinn said simply. "This is our home, our life. No one gets to dictate how we live it." Mary turned in his arms, looking up at him with a smile that still had the power to take his breath away. "Our life," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Quinn murmured, bending to kiss her as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm established itself at the Double C. The barn was completed with the help of neighbors who, if not entirely approving of Quinn and Mary's unconventional arrangement, at least respected their right to live as they chose. Jenkins and his son were charged with arson and ultimately agreed to pay restitution rather than face jail time, a solution that satisfied Quinn's practical nature more than a desire for punishment. Mary gradually became more comfortable venturing into town, though she still preferred the open spaces of the ranch to the confines of Sweetwater's dusty streets. She attended church services occasionally, sitting quietly beside Quinn and nodding politely to the curious but increasingly accepting townsfolk. As autumn deepened toward winter, Quinn found himself thinking more and more about making their arrangement permanent. They had already crossed the lines of propriety in the eyes of many. Marriage would at least provide a veneer of respectability to what was, in truth, a deep and genuine love. But he hesitated to ask, uncertain whether Mary would welcome the formal ties of matrimony after her experiences. She seemed content with things as they were, and he didn't want to risk upsetting the balance they'd found. The decision was taken out of his hands on a crisp November evening as they sat by the fire after supper. Mary had been unusually quiet all day, a thoughtful expression on her face that Quinn had learned to recognize as a sign she was working through something important. "Quinn," she said finally, setting aside the shirt she'd been mending. "I've been thinking." "About?" he prompted when she didn't immediately continue. "About us. About the future." She met his gaze directly. "About making this official." Quinn's heart leaped, but he kept his voice steady. "Official in what way?" A smile tugged at the corners of Mary's mouth. "You know exactly what I mean, Quinn Calloway. Or are you going to make me ask you?" "I wouldn't dream of it," Quinn said, moving from his chair to kneel before her. He took her hands in his, marveling as always at how perfectly they fit together despite the differences, his large and calloused from years of ranch work, hers smaller but equally strong and capable. "Mary," he began, then paused, suddenly unsure of the words. He'd never proposed before, had never expected to find someone who would make him want to. "Yes?" she prompted, her eyes dancing with amusement at his uncharacteristic hesitation. "I'm not good with fancy words," Quinn admitted, "but I know what I feel. I love you, Mary. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you've made this place a home. I love the person I am when I'm with you." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Make this partnership official in every way." Mary's smile bloomed fully, transforming her face with joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Quinn Calloway." Quinn pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise he felt for their future together. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Mary rested her forehead against his. "There's something else," she said softly. "Something I haven't told you." Quinn tensed slightly, uncertain what revelation might follow. "My full name," Mary continued. "It's Mary Elizabeth Harrington. I was a schoolteacher in St. Louis before joining the wagon train." She smiled at his surprised expression. "I thought you should know who you're marrying. All of me, not just the woman you found at the edge of your property." "Mary Elizabeth Harrington," Quinn repeated, savoring the name. "It suits you, though I fell in love with just Mary and would have been happy with that forever." "I know," she said, touching his cheek gently. "That's why I could tell you. Because you loved me without knowing, without asking for my past." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Sweetwater. Reverend Miller officiated, his wife stood as witness for Mary, and old Tom Peterson stood up for Quinn. The church wasn't fulsome and town still disapproved, but those who attended did so with genuine good wishes. Mary wore the dress Mrs. Miller had given her, altered to fit her slender frame. Quinn wore the only suit he owned, brushed free of dust and pressed for the occasion. They spoke their vows clearly and firmly, promising to love and honor each other for all the days of their lives. When Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed his bride to scattered applause and a few whoops from the Hamilton brothers, who had never been known for their decorum. The celebration afterward was held at the Double C, where the new barn was decorated with lanterns and fall flowers. There was dancing and food, laughter and good wishes, and if some faces from town were noticeably absent, neither Quinn nor Mary remarked upon it. As evening fell and the last guests departed, husband and wife stood once more on the porch of the cabin, their home arms wrapped around each other against the November chill. "Happy?" Quinn asked, pressing a kiss to the top of Mary's head. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, nestling closer to him. "A year ago, I was surviving day to day, afraid of my own shadow. And now?" Quinn prompted. Mary looked up at him, her blue eyes luminous in the gathering darkness. "Now I have a home, a husband, a future." She smiled, a private smile that held a hint of mystery. "And in about 7 months, if my calculations are correct, we'll have a family." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Quinn felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "You mean are you?" "Yes," Mary confirmed, her smile widening at his stunned expression. "I'm fairly certain. I've been feeling different, and it's been 2 months since my last monthly time." Joy surged through Quinn, so intense it was almost painful. He lifted Mary off her feet, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh in surprise. "A baby," he said in wonder as he set her down. Our baby, Mary agreed, her hand moving instinctively to rest on her still flat stomach. "I hope you're not upset that it's happening so soon." "Upset?" Quinn shook his head in disbelief. "Mary, it's everything. You're everything." He placed his hand over hers. "We're going to be a family." "We already are," Mary said softly. "This just makes it grow a little larger." They stood there on the porch as the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had faced down prejudice and violence to build a life together. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. And if there would be challenges ahead, as there always were on the frontier, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together. Spring came to Sweetwater Valley in a rush of green and gold, the land reawakening after winter's sleep. At the Double C, Quinn worked from dawn to dusk, preparing for the busy calving season while also making improvements to the cabin. He'd added a proper bedroom, separate from the main living area, and was now building a cradle from pine wood harvested from their own land. Mary, her pregnancy now visible beneath her dresses, divided her time between household tasks and helping with the lighter ranch work. She developed a particular affinity for the horses and spent hours in the corral, gentling the new foals born that spring. The town's attitude toward them had softened over the winter months. Marriage and the impending arrival of a child had lent respectability to their union, and Mary's quiet dignity had won over even some of the most skeptical townspeople. She now attended church regularly with Quinn, participated in quilting bees and other social events, and had even been asked to substitute teach at the small schoolhouse when the regular teacher fell ill. Orville Jenkins and his son kept their distance, the scandal of the barn burning having diminished their standing in the community. They'd paid for the rebuilding as ordered by the court, and while there was no friendliness between them and the Calloways, an uneasy peace prevailed. On a warm day in late May, Quinn returned from checking the herd to find Mary sitting on the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other holding a letter. "Mail came," she said as he dismounted. "There's one for you from the land office in Cheyenne." Quinn took the envelope, curiosity piqued. He hadn't had any dealings with the land office recently. Opening it, he scanned the official-looking document inside, his expression growing increasingly puzzled. "What is it?" Mary asked, noting his confusion. "It's about the property adjoining ours to the east," Quinn said. "The one that's been vacant since Old Man Wilkins died last year. Apparently, someone's filed a claim on it." "Is that a problem?" Mary asked. "We weren't planning to expand that way, were you?" "No," Quinn admitted. "But it's good grazing land. I'd been thinking about it, for the future." He folded the letter thoughtfully. "Says the new owner will be taking possession next month." "Well, we should welcome them," Mary said practically. "Having neighbors might be nice." Quinn nodded, though he was less certain. New neighbors meant change, and change on the frontier wasn't always for the better. But Mary was right, it could be an opportunity rather than a problem. The baby arrived 2 weeks later, in the middle of a summer thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the cabin and turned the yard to mud. Dr. Thompson from town had been summoned, but the baby, impatient like her father, Mary would later tease, didn't wait for his arrival. Quinn found himself delivering his own daughter, following Mary's surprisingly calm instructions and wondering at the miracle taking place before his eyes. When the tiny girl finally slipped into his waiting hands, squalling indignantly at her abrupt entry into the world, he felt a love so profound it stole his breath. "She's perfect," he whispered, placing the swaddled infant in Mary's arms. "Just like her mother." Mary looked down at their daughter, tears of joy mingling with the sweat of her labor. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." They named her Hope Elizabeth Calloway, and from the moment of her birth, she became the center of their world. Quinn, who had never held a baby before his daughter, found himself completely captivated by her tiny fingers, her blue eyes so like her mother's, the way she would grip his finger with surprising strength. Mary took to motherhood with the same quiet competence she brought to everything, though there were nights of exhaustion and moments of uncertainty. Together, they learned the rhythm of caring for an infant while still managing the demands of the ranch. It was during this busy, joyful time that they finally met their new neighbors. Quinn was in the corral, working with a spirited 2-year-old colt, when a wagon appeared on the road from town. Mary was sitting on the porch with Hope, enjoying the late summer sunshine while the baby napped in her cradle. The wagon turned up their drive, and Quinn paused his work, watching warily as it approached. A man and woman sat on the bench, with what appeared to be household goods loaded in the back. "Hello, the house," the man called as they drew nearer. "Would this be the Calloway place?" "It is," Quinn confirmed, leaving the corral and walking to meet them. "I'm Quinn Calloway." The man set the brake and jumped down from the wagon, extending his hand. He was middle-aged, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "James Wilson," he introduced himself. "And this is my wife, Rebecca. We've taken up the old Wilkins place next door." Quinn shook the offered hand. "Welcome to Sweetwater Valley." Mary had risen from her seat on the porch and was now walking toward them, Hope cradled in her arms. "Hello," she called. "Please, come in. You must be tired from your journey." The Wilsons accepted the invitation gratefully, and soon they were all seated around the kitchen table, sharing coffee and the fresh bread Mary had baked that morning. Hope was awake now, looking around with curious eyes from her mother's lap. "She's beautiful," Rebecca Wilson said, smiling at the baby. "How old?" "Just over a month," Mary replied. "Her name is Hope." "A lovely name," Rebecca said. "We have 3 of our own, though they're all grown now. That's partly why we decided to move west, start fresh, just the 2 of us." As they talked, Quinn learned that James had been a farmer in Ohio, but had always dreamed of ranching in the West. They'd sold their farm after their youngest son married, and had spent months researching where to settle before choosing Wyoming Territory. "We heard about the Wilkins place from a land agent in Cheyenne," James explained. "Seemed like a good opportunity, established water rights, some basic structures already in place." "It's good land," Quinn acknowledged. "Needs work, but there's potential there." "That's what we thought," James said. "And we're not afraid of work." By the time the Wilsons left, promising to host the Calloways for dinner once they were properly settled, Quinn found himself genuinely pleased about their new neighbors. James seemed knowledgeable about agriculture, if not specifically about ranching, and both he and his wife had a practical, down-to-earth quality that Quinn respected. "They seem nice," Mary said as they watched the wagon disappear down the road. "It'll be good for Hope to have neighbors nearby as she grows up." Quinn nodded, his arm around Mary's waist. "It's changing, isn't it? The valley, the whole territory. Everything changes," Mary said, looking down at their daughter. "That's how life works." "Not everything," Quinn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some things stay constant." Mary smiled, leaning into him. "Yes," she agreed softly. "The important things." The seasons turned, as they always did on the frontier, summer heat giving way to autumn crispness, then the deep cold of winter, and finally the renewal of spring. Hope grew from a newborn to a curious infant, then a toddler with her mother's blue eyes and her father's determined nature. The Double C prospered under Quinn and Mary's joint stewardship. They added more cattle, improved the bloodlines of their horses, and expanded the vegetable garden into a small but productive farm plot. The Wilsons proved to be excellent neighbors, sharing knowledge and resources, becoming close friends as well as fellow ranchers. Sweetwater Valley itself was changing too. The railroad came through a town 20 miles south, bringing new settlers and increased commerce. Sweetwater grew from a dusty collection of buildings to a proper town with a school, a bank, and even a small hotel. The old animosities faded as the community evolved, though Quinn and Mary never forgot the lessons of those early days, the importance of standing firm for what was right, even when facing opposition. On a warm summer evening, 5 years to the day from when Quinn had first found Mary at the edge of his property, they sat on the porch of their now expanded cabin, watching Hope play with the Wilsons' new puppy in the yard. Mary held their second child, 3-month-old James Quinn Calloway, who was sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. "Do you ever think about it?" Quinn asked, his voice low so as not to disturb the baby. "About that first day?" Mary nodded, her gaze distant with memory. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "I hadn't spoken to another person in almost 2 years. Hadn't trusted anyone. And then there you were, offering water and food with no expectations. I was afraid too," Quinn confessed. "Not of you, but of failing you somehow. Of not being what you needed." Mary shifted the baby slightly, reaching out to take Quinn's hand with her free one. "You were exactly what I needed," she said. "What I still need." Quinn squeezed her hand gently. "Do you remember what they called you in town? The wild woman?" He chuckled at the memory. "If only they could have seen how you'd handle a rifle." "I think they got the message when I fired that warning shot at Jenkins," Mary said with a small smile. "Sometimes being underestimated has its advantages." They fell silent, watching as Hope tumbled in the grass with the puppy, her laughter carrying on the evening air. "I never thought I'd have this," Mary said after a while. "After what happened to the wagon train, after those years alone, I'd convinced myself that survival was enough, that I didn't need connection or love or family. And now?" Quinn asked, though he knew the answer. Mary looked at him, her eyes full of the love that had grown between them through challenge and joy, hardship and peace. "Now I know that survival isn't enough. It's just the beginning." She glanced at Hope, then down at little James sleeping in her arms. "This what we've built together, this is what matters." Quinn leaned over to kiss her, a gentle confirmation of all they'd shared and all that lay ahead. "Together," he murmured against her lips. "Together," Mary agreed, the word a promise as enduring as the land around them, as constant as the love that had transformed a frightened, wild woman and a lonely rancher into a family bound by choice as much as by circumstance. And as the sun set over Sweetwater Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Quinn Calloway looked at his wife, his children, and the home they'd created, knowing with absolute certainty that some things, once found, were worth defending with everything you had, whether with a rifle, with courage, or with the steady, unwavering power of love.